thank you for the audience watching us live on Facebook and joining us for the Outsides Conference. We are streaming live on the New Mexico Out Business Alliance Facebook page. That is nmoba.org on Facebook, as well as the African American Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce Facebook page. So we are so excited to be able to initiate this conference. And with that, I want to introduce my co-host, who is President and CEO of the African American Chamber, Teresa Carson. And I want to acknowledge our behind the scenes coordinator, Erica Yoakum, who is pulling this all together for us. So I'm going to turn it over. Oh, and thank you to our sponsor, AARP, for tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Teresa.
Great. Thank you, Pam. So good evening, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be co-host to tonight's discussion with the New Mexico Out Business Alliance. So tonight's panel will be addressing some very critical issues: racial justice, diversity, voter rights and suppression, and police reform. The panel will provide insights on the need for thoughtful conversations and action on these challenges that need to result in sustaining systemic change. So on behalf of the African American Chamber, welcome to the discussion. So at this point, I have the privilege to introduce Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who will provide some welcome remarks. So Congresswoman Haaland represents the 1st District of New Mexico. She is no stranger to utilizing her voice on the issues we will be discussing tonight. Representative Haaland is truly an advocate for equality for all. She demonstrates this through her actions that produces results. She is a 35th generation New Mexican who is an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Laguna and also has a Jemez Pueblo heritage. Congresswoman Haaland was elected as one of the first Native American women to serve in Congress. Thank you, Congresswoman Haaland, for being here with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And I'm honored to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to see everyone. Welcome, all of you, to today's conference. Thank you to the New Mexico Out Business Alliance and the African American Greater Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. Black Lives Matter. The conversations we've had recently about systemic racism, police brutality, and inequality needed to happen a long time ago, and they can no longer wait. Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely than white Americans to be killed by police. For far too long, police brutality and countless murders of Black lives have been stolen at the hands of police who lack racial consciousness, bystanders who do not disrupt excessive force, and those who abuse their power are rarely held accountable. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many more have shined a light on the racial injustices still alive in our country. Breonna Taylor is a reminder that justice is still not served and that communities are still hurting. Within the first 7 months of 2020, the number of transgender people murdered or suspected of being murdered was more than the entirety of those killed in 2019. Violence against Black transgender women is rampant. Whether it be the abuse of power that poisons the air and water surrounding communities of color, taking away protections for undocumented young people, underfunding Indian tribes, thereby putting them at disproportionate risk during this pandemic, or police brutality that kills unarmed Black people, we must untangle the racist webs that are woven into our laws and policies. This past June, the House passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which seeks to transform the culture of policing in our country, hold power abusers accountable, get weapons of war off our streets, and promote justice across the country. This is a step in a long, intensive process. We must take action across the board to address institutional and systemic racism in our country. Rachel Sams, editor-in-chief of Albuquerque Business First, wrote a timely article on how business leaders can start conversations about racism. Rachel quotes many prominent business leaders in New Mexico, but I want to mention the part where Teresa Carson says that we must, quote, foster an environment where all individuals are treated fairly, valued, and respected, ensuring that their workforce reflects the diversity of the New Mexico community. I agree with this wholeheartedly. I spoke with local Black Lives Matter organizers back in June of this year, and Hosanna Scott said, "We are in a movement, not a moment." So I'm very grateful you are continuing conversations about diversity today. Fathers are pledging for justice, mothers are still crying for their murdered children, and people of color are still dying, while the system remains the same. We cannot remain stagnant. We cannot stay on the same course. We must demand change, and we must be relentless in that demand. My dear departed colleague, John Lewis, said, "When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something." I will continue to do everything I can in Congress to promote equality, protect voting rights, and make sure our communities are safe. And again, I'm so grateful to be here, and I thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Congresswoman Haaland. We really appreciate your taking the time and coming to join us today and being our representative. So thank you. Teresa?
Hi, thank you, Pam. So now I'd like to introduce our two dynamic moderators for this evening. The first is Gene Grant. Gene is the host of New Mexico in Focus on New Mexico PBS. Previously, he was a columnist for the Albuquerque Journal, the Albuquerque Tribune, and the Weekly Alibi. He also wrote the Albuquerque on Film column for Albuquerque, the magazine. Gene has also written on the New Mexico film industry for Variety magazine. He is the father of two beautiful girls. He's a playwright, actor, and announcer at the Albuquerque Dragway. Our second moderator is Isaac Rivas Savell. He has a diverse and successful career in education for more than 14 years that consists of being a teacher, instructional coach, district mentor to incoming staff, and assistant principal. Most recently, Isaac was a teacher liaison for the New Mexico Public Education Department, designing and delivering professional development for teachers across the state, and co-hosting both podcasts for virtual trainings and the New Mexico Teacher Summit for over 13,000 teachers. Isaac is the founder of Voss Collegiate Preparatory Charter School for 6th to 8th grade students in Albuquerque. The school will open in August of 2021. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today.
Grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
now Teresa and I are going to step away, and Eric is going to admit all of the panelists, and then we will see you at the end of the program.
Sounds
Right on.
great.
Thank you.
Mhm.
In the interim, I do want to thank Teresa and Pam for putting this together. It's timely, it's important, it's where we need to go. It's about, as Isaac and I were talking about planning for this, it's about dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. And Isaac, if you want to throw in on that too, please feel free. It's just, this is how you do your thing too, as a matter of fact. So
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to thank all of our viewers and our listeners that are tuning in at home or whatever venue you have selected to tune in. We've got quite the lineup this evening, and we're thrilled to be able to engage in this relevant and timely discussion about the critical issues that are impacting our communities right now. And with us this evening to help bring those issues to light is a host of incredible panelists from various backgrounds and experiences who are leading this equity work in their own respective capacities and roles. And panelists, first of all, thank you so much for being with us this evening, taking the time out of your schedule to join us. Each of you will be given 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and the organizations that you represent, and why the topic that you have chosen is an important part of this evening's discussion. And Charles, Ashley, we'll begin with you.
Actually, I don't see Charles. Is he
I don't
in
see
the
Charles
mix?
either.
Yeah,
But we could start with Adrian.
that'll work.
Good evening. Hi, Isaac and Jean. Can y'all hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Adrian Lawyer. I use he pronouns, and I'm the executive director at the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. TGRC has been around since 2008. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we exist to serve trans and non-binary people statewide here in New Mexico through a combination of direct services, advocacy, and education work.
Wonderful.
Go. You got a couple of seconds there. You can spare. Go ahead and expand on that.
Oh,
It's
super.
please do.
Don't get an ED started about their organization.
We love it.
No, I know. I'll stay to my time, I promise.
okay.
Yeah, in terms of direct services, we just really try to plug in with trans folks all over New Mexico and help them in any way we can. That can include emergency financial assistance, help with your name change, help updating your identity documents, connecting to a provider, peer support. We can do a lot of things for people all over the state. Here in the metro area, we also operate a drop-in center where we're typically providing services to our most impacted community members. So typically trans folks who are experiencing homelessness, who are unemployed, who often are living on the street, but who are struggling with major resource insecurity, which typically, of course, means trans folks of color and trans women predominantly. We know that discrimination and violence is intersectional in nature, that the discrimination that trans people face is not evenly distributed among our populations. So we see that at the drop-in center every single day. In terms of advocacy, we will be an advocate for you if you just need help going through your name change hearing or your doctor's appointment. A lot of trans people are deeply afraid of going to a medical provider because of all of the bad things that have happened to trans folks in the past. We also do policy advocacy and legislative work too. And we provide Transgender 101 and Transgender 201 trainings to groups throughout the country, actually. We're doing them on Zoom exclusively for the last few months. So I've trained a clinic in Dakota, and I trained at an HIV conference in Texas, all from my chair here. But we're always glad to train folks in New Mexico. In 10 years, we've done more than 1,500 of those trainings.
And thank you, Adrian, for your work and your contributions. I've reached out to the Transgender Resource Center myself as the head of school of a brand new school. As we write our school policies, it's just really important to make sure that we're involving and bringing in all voices to the table. So thank you for your work.
I'm so excited about your school, Isaac. I feel like I got to hear about it when it was still the ground floor, and now it's really coming to fruition. It's going to be such a great thing.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I'll be reaching out again.
Good.
Good deal. If I might, may I introduce Pamela Herndon next? Pamela and I have some history, of course, and Pamela has, I mean, professionally, that came out kind of weirdly, but sorry about that. So many good, interviews and such. You're always fascinating to talk to. So tell us about what you're angling tonight for this conference. Oh, you're muted.
I think it's here. Oh. Am I unmuted now?
You're good.
All right. Thank you, Jean and Isaac. It's a pleasure to be here with you both. I am the president, CEO of KWH Law Center for Social Justice and Change, where we focus on raising the well-being of children and women and families with children and making sure that marginalized organizations and people are no longer marginalized. But tonight we're focusing on voter suppression. And voter suppression is one of the biggest concerns regarding the November 3rd general election. And you may ask, what is voter suppression? Well, voter suppression occurs when limitations or barriers are placed upon you to keep you from voting, or if there are procedures or methods in place to make sure that your vote is not counted. And in New Mexico, we are fortunate to have leaders like Linda Stover, the clerk in Bernalillo County, Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, the Secretary of State, who together with clerks in at least 7 other counties throughout this state mailed applications for absentee ballots to every single person within their jurisdiction to make sure that they were safe and could vote during this COVID-19 pandemic. And my caution to you and to everyone is to make sure that no one suppresses your vote, but make sure you don't suppress your own vote. So if you're not registered, you have until October 31st to go in person to a county clerk's office and get registered. And if you need an absentee ballot, you have until October 20th at 5 p.m. to make sure that you have that absentee ballot. And when you decide to vote in person, make sure that if a person blocks your pathway, intimidates you, or scares you, that's voter suppression. And you go to the presiding judge, go call the county clerk, call the Secretary of State or one of the lawyers who will be present during poll watching to make sure your voting is done correctly and make sure your vote counts. And in New Mexico, remember, you do not need a voter ID to vote unless you are voting for the first time after submitting your voter registration online. And in 2013, Gene and Isaac, I just want to remind you of one last thing. When the Supreme Court struck down a crucial provision in the 1965 Voter Rights Act, there have been numerous attempts to suppress people's rights to vote. But don't give up that right to vote. Keep our democracy strong.
Excellent. Glad you're here. Believe me, we'll have some questions on this very issue later, so this will be a good discussion. Isaac, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Pamela. Do not suppress your own vote. I think that should be the title of your next your memoirs. Thank you, Pamela. Doris, we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, and thank you, Gene. Thank you, Isaac. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Doris Watson. I'm a Lobo, so that's my connect, I think, most immediately. I'm presently a professor of higher education at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We call ourselves warmly here Rebel Lobos because there are many of us who have attachment to Albuquerque and UNM in particular. My angle tonight is to be sort of, I guess, the generalist in regards to diversity and equity and inclusion. I'm in my 32nd year in higher education, and I have a long career of advocacy on campus and in communities as it pertains to access and success of students, marginalized folks in higher education and through that particular pipeline. What I kind of want to talk about a little bit, just to kind of set my own stage, is the scenario before us presently, the socio-political time that we're in right now isn't new, right? This is a playbook that has been used over and over and over to disenfranchise Black folks and folks of color in terms of voter suppression and in terms of economic disenfranchisement. And so what we're seeing is not new. I think the conversations are at a heightened level that has buoyed my hope in ways that hasn't been for some time. But we have a lot of work to do. And again, I'm just very excited for the questions and I'm excited to participate. So thank you.
Perfect. Who else do we see in there? Oh, is that Charles Bicknell Jr.? Charles, welcome.
Thank you for having me, the African American Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce and the New Mexico Out. It's a privilege to be with you this evening. My topic is racial injustice. And I just want to say, it's a timely topic, and given our current situation, this is a time and a moment where we are lamenting, I would say, over the historical injustices acted against people of color, African Americans, indigenous people, people from the LGBTQ community, brown people, women. This is a time of lament, and the lament that we experience historically spills over into this precise moment, and we grieve over the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, we grieve over the killing of George Floyd, and we grieve over the murder of Breonna Taylor. Of state-sanctioned violence and racial injustice. Yet, our hearts are filled with lament, but we understand the power that Ingrid Ruth holds for calling our nation, for calling our city, and for calling our state to be more deeply dedicated to humane ideas. And so I am the director of the Africana Studies program at the University of New Mexico, and we are dedicated to teaching our students about these issues and helping them understand that the education that they receive is not for affluence, but influence to challenge these unequal. And so I thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening.
Charles, if I could get a favor, might you have a headset or an earplug you could plug into your device, whatever you're talking to? We're having just a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Yeah, I don't have a headset.
Oh, suddenly you sound a lot better. That was
That's
Okay.
much better. That's much better.
Huh, whatever you did.
Yeah.
Keep that.
Well, thank you, Charles. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more from you this evening. We'll head over to the other Charles Ashley III.
Good evening, everyone. How's it? It's good seeing familiar faces. So, how you guys doing? Charles Ashley III. I'm pretty much like Doris, where I'm going to speak in regards to a lot of the social justice issues that we have. And when you think about it, there's so many. The list goes on and on and on, right? It's just a long list of things that we're all trying to tackle in the United States. What I've been more focused on is I work with a lot of youth, young adults or whatnot. So we've seen it firsthand, the disparities in broadband and the digital education, in the education and computer science space. And that's the thing that really struck a chord with me 6 years ago. I mean, you knew about it, but it's different when you see it firsthand, right? Where you go into communities and you say, well, who's your computer science teacher? And the computer science teacher happens to be the PE teacher who was the best at Excel. And then you start to see why a lot of our young Black and brown kids aren't getting into education fields where they're not just lucrative, but they're transformative, right? These are paths that are going to change your generational wealth, but it's going to change your community. Think about all the bright ideas that can come from Black and brown kids who've been overlooked for so long. So that to me is the social issue that I've been really focused on, and I would love to share our journey. I would love to share some thoughts on where we're going. I'll love to cause a little trouble. I'm a habitual line stepper, so I will I'll speak candidly about it. My role in the daytime, I'm president and CEO of Cultivating Coders. We're a fully functional computer software company, but our biggest mission is traveling to places that people overlook, and we live out there for 8, 12, 20 weeks and provide young adults and young people with high-end computer science education training, project-based, hands-on type of stuff. So we've seen firsthand where we've had to literally bring in our own internet connection. We had to bring in our own equipment. We've had to convince people in communities where we say, hey, why don't you have a laptop? And they think this is all the technology that they need. And so you do see that digital divide. You see an education gap, which also leads to your wealth gap. So if you're not in the industries that people are shelling out millions of dollars for, you're going to always be taking jobs in the traditional blue collar. And there's nothing wrong with it. Black and brown people built this country, so we need that. But we also want to be in that space where people are paying, premium prices for this, your brain, like your knowledge. So looking forward to having an open discussion with all of you.
Terrific. Glad you're here. Let me introduce another friend of the community, Stephen Sachs. Stephen, welcome.
Beautiful to be with you as an academic, researcher, activist, writer. I've been very concerned about, a lot of ways the communities need to be, the whole society needs to be made more participatory, and particularly right now with policing. We and the police have been suffering from the fact that first they operate in an inefficient way as patrol and respond to calls. And then they become more and more militarized, and all of that has made them alienated from the communities they serve. Therefore, officers get very nervous in the community. They fall back on prejudices. Some of them are overt, but a lot of them are simply those things that if you don't examine them are there, stereotyping and so forth. And with militarization, they've been too quick to use force, and that's had terrible results. But there are all kinds of ways, at first people of color, but also other folks, particularly as classism as well as racism involved here. And all of that needs to be overcome. And what we need to do is move from what's been an us against them system that's really gotten bad to coming to we. And we've done some of this in Albuquerque and elsewhere, but not enough. And that's to really move fully to real community policing. If you really have the officers in the community, and some of them are from it, and they really are properly trained, you have the right procedures, you have to change those too, then you can really have dialoguing. The officers can know what's going on, they can work with the community can help correct them, and they have to do more to correct themselves. Of course, we also have to remove some of the bars that are in the way. Some of that involves officers not being punished when they should be. And that hurts the other officers. Those guys have got to get to realize that. But right now, they're too defensive. And we've got to overcome that. Now, two things need to happen to bring the change. One of them is we got to keep on having folks who are out there protesting and petitioning and so forth. So the pressure is on. But we also then have to have other folks who are with the same goals come in and say, wait a minute, police officers, you know, you're not able to function well. You're not getting the support you want. We'd like to see good police. We really need good policing. There's a mutual problem here. Let's sit down and problem solve. And maybe we can break through some of that. I mean, police unions have been a major problem in stopping some of this. And if we can talk to them or they'll listen and there's enough pressure so that they will, maybe we can get somewhere. That's what I'm hoping for.
And that's wonderful, Stephen, and we're so appreciative of having you on tonight's panel. This evening, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us this evening, first of all. Secondly, we did want to reserve some time during this conversation, this discussion, to really place a spotlight on what young adults are doing right now and how they've been activated and mobilized. And so I'll begin with you, Charles Ashley, if I may. You and Mike Silva have been leading peaceful Black Lives Matter assemblies and demonstrations at Civic Plaza here in Albuquerque. And we've seen an uptick in our young adults becoming more and more involved. And now more than ever, young adults are involved in truly shaping our political and social landscape. And from your perspective and from what you've witnessed and seen, why is this mobilization and activism amongst our young adults in particular so critical to this movement in our history right now?
Yeah, I'd like to tackle that, Isaac. You know what? Young people go like dating back into way, I guess, before my days and my mother's days, my grandmother's days, have always been really like a backbone of activism, right? And really like speaking and voicing our displeasure with things. Me and Mike Silva, by accident, created like Borky Against Racism in regards to just sitting back as an older Black man myself, being 40 and remembering what it was like being 18 and 19 and going through different struggles or whatnot. And then you grow up and you kind of, you build a life or whatnot. So you kind of not disconnect, but you're not in the streets like you used to be, right? But then when a lot of this stuff started going on and taking place, a lot of my students reach out and say, "Hey, Mr. Ashley, what do you think we should do? Should we be creating some platforms talking about get out and vote, right? Or should we be in the streets marching? What should we be doing?" And it even made me reflect to myself, like, what should I be doing myself, right? I should probably be out there voicing my anger. I used to hide it and say it wasn't anger; it was more like displeasure. It's anger, right? You're frustrated at something, and this year was a year that the young people decided we're going to take it from the groups that's been doing it before us, and we're gonna take that responsibility and go to the streets. And what I like is there's some young people who are out there that are a little bit more vocal. There's some out there who are using technology as an advantage, right? They're saying go vote, and not just vote, Isaac and Jean. They're talking about they're really getting to the nitty gritty that like we can't control everything federally, but we can control things locally when we vote. Like, and it creates a better environment, a better community for us. So what I've seen with the young movement, the activation from the youth, is that they're a little bit more cerebral than what we were. Right, they're looking at like systems changed, and they'll figure out the best way to do it. And if they got to raise a little bit of hell, they'll do it. But what I've seen is they're talking about going to the Capitol. They're talking about doing petitions. They're talking about how do we do reform and change. And they give you an ask. When they get in front of a politician, they have an ask, a direct ask, and they'll say, we're not voting for you if you don't support these 3 things. So that's that we've been seeing in regards to the protest and just the activation. It's been there, but now it's ramped up.
Yeah, Gene, go ahead.
No, I'm with you. Go ahead, Isaac.
I just think that we're on the cusp of a really motivated, driven generation of young adults who are very much awake, and they're far more connected than I was at that age. And it's such a platitude, but they really are the voice of the future. And my next question, and this is a good segue, you highlighted a little bit of this, is what is your call to action to these young adults who are motivated to see change? They've been involved in demonstration, they've taken to the streets, and now how do they take it a step beyond that? What is your call to action to these young folks?
Your call to action is, as I touched on a little bit, have an ask, have a demand when you start meeting with people. Start looking at yourself as a leader. I think we've been brainwashed. I think a lot of young people have been brainwashed to say, I only could run for office if I'm X amount of age or if I'm certain age. And that's not the case. If that was the case, we wouldn't be in these situations that we're in now, right? If age actually mattered, we wouldn't be up against a lot of the things that we're facing right now. So it's being proactive, which they are, like you said, Isaac. They're a lot more in tune with what's going on, but they're a lot more educated. And then if they're not educated, what I would even suggest, if you are trying to create change and you're struggling, reach out for mentors. There are a lot of older folks who are willing to work with the youth and younger adults to say, you guys are next, but I don't look at it as next. They're right here. It's if we can get the younger we can get, and that goes from like the Senate to all the way up to everywhere, as high as we can go. If we can get younger, you're going to see more progression, because our youth, and I say this, my kids, they truly can say they don't see color. They see it, but they interact with so many different people from different walks of life, and they have these interactions that they see us bickering online or in the president saying this or someone saying this, all this racial tension, and they're truly like mind blown that we're even dealing with these issues. So that to me is encouraging, that knowing that this is what's next for our country. So it's hang in there, be aggressive, don't take no for answers. And like I said, lean on these mentors. This panel right here, a great group of people.
Doris Watson, I'm sorry, Isaac, my fault there. Doris Watson, this is a good place for you to pick up on that. Where do we start to dismantle systemic problems? Is there a point of entry? Is there one specific place that you've observed where leverage could be brought to bear at this point?
Gene, that's like asking, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And so I completely agree with what Charles III said. A couple things. One, and I'll answer your question. I do believe that the moment now being led by the younger generation, young folks, is a line in the sand that we have not seen. And the students that I work with, what I hear the most now is, Doc, don't send me a statement of support. I don't need your support. I need your action. And I think that's what's been pushing and pulling the conversation. That, in addition to having more white folks leading these protests as well and having these conversations. What I say is, it cannot be only folks of color who are initiating and marching. If change is going to come, it has to be an equal, if not in some respects, more involvement by white folks. They are the ones who benefit from these systems, and they are the ones whose voices against these systems of racism, sexism, blah, 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 are heard oftentimes the loudest. And so to answer your question, Jean, again, one bite at a time. So I do not embrace the notion of a silver bullet response.
Okay.
I think that there are multiple places for leverage, and it's time for simultaneous action always. So it's not just about voter suppression or getting the vote out. It's not just about economic disenfranchisement. It's all of attending to all of these. And so, to again Charles's point, what I advocate for is for us to open up the whole conception of what is a leader. I don't need a hat. I don't need a T-shirt. I don't need the right kind of uniform, right? Or if we have a voice, we are all leaders. And I think from that standpoint, then there are multiple points of leveraging that happen simultaneously.
Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. All of the issues we're talking about and others that are related are interrelated, and they all need to be dealt with. And we need different people doing different things and finding the various places that fit who they are, and in order to get this done.
May I add one other thing? I do think that there is a significant puzzle piece to this response that would also include white folks and the acknowledgement of racism. Ibrahim Kendi, depending upon how you read him, how you don't read him, I embrace his point, or I appreciate his point around the notion that the U.S. is a country that is addicted to racism. And he uses this analogy, which makes folks uncomfortable until you really start unpacking it. And when you think about addictions, the foundation of an addiction and maintaining an addiction lies with denial. And we have a long history of denying racism in this country. We have a long history of white folks. I'm not a racist, right? So Eduardo Bonilla Silva, one of my favorite authors, his book, Racism Without Racists, really hits to this. Most white folks do not identify as racist, yet it persists. And so for the US, so I think a salient leverage point would be the acknowledgement, the confession, if you will, of white folks to their racist beliefs. That's the starting point for true reconciliation.
Isaac, please.
Yes, absolutely, Doris. I think you bring up lots of great points here. And we do have white folks who are doing the work of interrogating their own personal biases and are largely engaged in anti-racist work. So my question for the group, and Doris, if you want to chime in as well, obviously, how can white folks continue to do this anti-racism work, anti-racist work, and take it a step beyond that and be more productive allies?
I'll begin. This sounds, I won't apologize, but this is going to come off a little harsh, a little edgy. But as a white person, I ask white folks, if you find yourself only engaged in these conversations when you show up to a workshop or a training or a scenario such as this, you need to do better. And there's a term that we deal with in higher ed and academics, white estrangement. So if most of your time is spent around white folks, if you do not have a significant other friend in your life, in your world, and this is the only time you engage in these conversations, do better. So that would be the first examination I would ask white folks to do.
Charles Bicknell, I'm curious if you're seeing some help on campus from white folks. You got a unique perspective with the department you had. And you're muted still, Charles.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, academia is a space where ideas flourish. You have the freedom to speak and the freedom to develop, broad-based ideas. But I think that academia is also siloed. There are very siloed spaces in academia, and to Doris's point, one can become very comfortable in the space that they create for themselves and the ideas that they build up in those spaces. And some of those ideas can be, developed as helpful, developed as valuable, but in turn, they tend to do more damage than good. And so, the capital in academia is words and ideas. And, sometimes folks will sell those words and those ideas for profit as opposed to influence. And that's the danger about, being in an academic space and being a white ally. But, when I think about the role that non-Black people and, non-people of color can play, I do think that there's a role of taking initiative, right? And exercising personal agency to dismantle these injustices. In educating themselves beyond their traditional disciplines. You can get comfortable in sociology, but not think about the Black experience as a sociologist, or think about the Black experience as a geographer. And so this is where the power of ethnic studies comes into play to address these disparities in academia. So I think education is critical. And is the world we're living in, information comes at us through different mediums and forms. So I would suggest picking up a book, like a real book. Don't get your information from Facebook. Don't get your information from social media, but actually go through the practice of reading text, being critical and analyzing text, and developing your own ideas, right? And then having dialogue with people who have different ideas and not run or evade when your ideas get challenged, right? This is how growth occurs. And then be willing to be taught, right? So there's an act of humility in this exercise. Be willing to be taught by someone who consciously or unconsciously you've been conditioned over a historical period of time to believe that is at a lower stage in the racial and social hierarchy, right? So there has to be some disturbance of one's moral compass when it comes to that. And then, it had been said before, to immerse oneself in in a culture or an experience unlike your own, right? And then to be an advocate. So that's how I would address that, broadly and then specifically within academia.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Adrian, I'd like to direct this question to you and the work that you're doing. The National Coalition of the Anti-Violence Programs, they released a report, and it states that 20 to 25% of lesbian and gay people experience hate crimes sometime in their lives.
Yeah.
That coalition report also states that homicides have been surging amongst the community since about 2007. And we all know that the most at-risk communities are transgender women, LGBTQ plus and HIV affected people of color, transgender people of color. And in the work that you're immersed in, you see it every day. Where do you think this violence is rooted? And what can we do to change this? Where do you think this?
I 100% believe that these systems are completely interconnected and they're interlocking. That's why we see Black transgender women being the #1 group within the transgender population who experience street violence and also who are killed by strangers. So this is certainly about trans people, because I think there's still a misunderstanding. Trans folks have always existed, but to many people in the US, this seems like a new phenomenon because the visibility is new. The awareness is new, but we're not new. We've always been part of the human fabric the whole entire time. So there's definitely a trans issue here, but what I see is that we live in a culture, the dominant culture of the United States, that is pervasively and violently misogynistic and racist. And when you combine those things, that's, I think, where LGBTQ violence comes from, is that potent intersection of those not just systems of oppression, but people's own personal hatred that they have towards femme folks, people of color. And that's why we see that someone like, well, I mean, first of all, I can't be identified as trans just by looking at me, right? I have to tell people that I'm trans. So people who are visibly trans are always in more danger than somebody like me who blends in without any real effort, right? I just assimilate visually. Folks who don't are in more danger, but certainly trans people who are also people of color are going to experience the worst outcomes in our society. We see it at our drop-in center every day, like you said, Isaac. The folks who come just to get a single meal, just to be able to use a safe bathroom one time in the day, are almost all young Native American trans women, are Latina or Black, but predominantly in New Mexico, Native American, of course.
Adrian, is there any legislation that New Mexico is introducing to help protect our transgender folks?
We are so lucky here. This is what goes back to what was already said about local municipal elections, county elections, state elections, that Charles was saying. This is why this is so important, because we have such a friendly administration and legislature here. We've been able to do the things that we needed to do over the years. Only 17 states in the country right now have enumerated protections for trans people in their non-discrimination law, and New Mexico is one of them. Since 2003, that predates the Resource Center. So the heroes that got that law passed are the ones whose shoulders we stand on now doing the work that we do, right? So we've had that protection in place for a long time. And then we've been able to advance other things like how you change the gender marker on your birth certificate. That was a legislative victory that TGRC and our partners had last session. So we are able to do that here, at the state level. What we need to now, we now need to really turn our eyes to that federal level, because we haven't seen attacks like this on trans people really ever. This is unprecedented in terms of the way this administration has come directly after trans people.
Wow. I'm curious, Stephen Sachs, is there a law enforcement angle here to protect trans people? Yeah, it's kind of an obvious question, but how do we get law enforcement to understand what's going on with what Adrian's saying here and extend something a little bit further?
Well, I think there are a number of things on that, and some people will know more about this than I do. I don't deal every day with the police. But some of it, the first thing is awareness, and some of that has to be in the head. So some initial training can help, but getting out and having experience with those people. So there's some dialogue, and you know who these people are, and you begin to understand. So it breaks down the us versus them. Oh, wait, here's somebody I know. And, that's one of the things that really got the whole trans movement moving, when enough people knew somebody I know or somebody in my family or so forth. And suddenly, wham, what seemed impossible suddenly happened. And I think the same thing needs to be done with police officers, though there may be other ways to do that.
Appreciate that. Isaac, you have one? Oh, you're muted. It's all right.
I'd like to shift gears here, and talk about voter suppression. And Pamela, if you would take this question, are minorities being targeted for voter suppression? And if so, can you describe some of the tactics and their effectiveness to suppress that minority vote?
Oh, you're still muted, Pam. There you go.
There we go.
As we've been looking at, thank you very much. As we've been looking at voter suppression over the past years, and particularly since the last election, what we found is that on an average, about 45% of Black voters and people of color wait in line about 45% longer than people who are white. And not only that, we find that people of color tend to have to wait 30 minutes longer before they can vote. So we're trying to figure out, like, why exactly is this happening? Is it because we are not putting these voting locations in communities of color and requiring communities of color to travel more to vote? So what we've been looking at is putting together something called the John Lewis Program for Chairs and Water. So that when we look at these voting locations that are in communities of color, where the lines tend to be long, we're asking community organizations like Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Omega Psi Phi, NAACP. You take chairs out there, you take water, you make sure that people stay comfortable so that they don't leave those voting locations and that they cast their votes. And then when you get to vote, make sure that you're voting for people who care about you and your right to vote. And when you get to the polls and you find that nobody fits that agenda, then you do what the Reverend Al Sharpton says every Sunday morning. Don't go past looking at the person in the mirror, because it's time for you to step up and run for office. Charles Ashley, you said that earlier. You said young people, hey, they don't have to be young. You just need to have a heart, a desire, and a
There's
passion
also
to run.
a legal challenge that needs to be made in some cases. I did a lot with American Indians, and it's very clear in some reservations, and this is true in the South and in many other places, where intentionally there aren't enough voting machines, or it's too hard, it's intentionally made too far to go. The American Civil Liberties Union has gotten together with local folks and brought cases, and sometimes that needs to be done. And of course, pressure on local politicians pointing out that that's happening where they're vulnerable, if it's known, can also be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Pamela, can I spin back a question to you? I've often wondered if the Secretary of State's office or even county clerk, things like that, is that not attractive for Black people to run for? Because it seems to me, if we get more folks in those positions, we get a better shot at correcting some of these things you're talking about. Does that make sense?
It makes absolutely good sense, Gene. And what we have to do is to give people of color the confidence that they can run for office and win. And that's why we seem to find a lack of empathy for people themselves, because they say, oh, I can't win. Where am I going to get the money to run for this office? What we need to do, and what we're working on, is to try to build up those platforms and build up that infrastructure within people themselves to say you can make a difference, and that if you want to change a platform such as voting and voting suppression, you need to run for these offices such as county clerk. You need to run for Secretary of State, and then make sure that you get your plan in early. And I guarantee you, you can win. It can happen. Look at Shamara Henderson right now, first Black woman ever running for the Court of Appeals, and I think she's going to win. And that's a non-political statement.
Pamela, this question is for you as well. We've heard from President Barack Obama. We've heard from the First Lady. They have stated, make a plan to vote. The election is weeks away. What is your call to action, and what does that mean, Pamela, when they both stated, make sure that you have a plan to vote?
Absolutely. We have been touting that position along with Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and many others. We ask you to look at your calendar right now, determine what day you're going to vote. Are you going to vote early? Are you going to wait until election day? Or are you going to use an absentee ballot? But whatever your plan is, make sure it's set out today. And then don't just stop at yourself. Make sure that every single person within your family has a plan, and talk about that plan. And then when you can't stop there, I say, then you have to go to your friends and make sure every last one of them sets out a date, a time and a place that vote is going to be cast. So that's the plan that Barack Obama and Michelle talk about, and that's the plan that we support.
Hey,
100%.
Charles, same subject. I'm curious from your point of view, and I'm sorry, Charles Ashley, sorry, and then Charles Bicknell, if you want to throw in on this too. But for young people, traditionally, there's a lot of noise leading up to Election Day, and then a lot of times young people don't show up as much as we would all like percentage-wise. Does something feel different this time around to you, though? Does this feel like a different election cycle, that it just doesn't matter with so much in the air right now? Young people are just going to are just highly motivated to get out there.
Yeah, I think it's almost the storm happened to be perfect for a lot of like what's going on, right? You have young people sitting at home. You have young people doing the virtual learning. You have young people who are seeing things take place for the first time in their lives, like at an age where they can comprehend what's going on. They're witnessing stuff, like with the George Floyd murder, Ahmaud Arbery, with Breonna, with all this stuff, they're witnessing now for the first time in their lives. And then they're also seeing a direct divide. There's a group of people who want this country to live up to everything that is supposed to be, right? What the founding fathers said we're supposed to be. And then there's a segment of people who they just want to continue to eat all the cake and keep everything to themselves and keep people divided. And these young people, they've picked up on it. It's not one of those things where I kind of think my dad is a racist. It's
right.
We have kids who are like, oh, my dad's a racist. So we make sure that we vote for the right people. And they're a lot more active. They're a lot more motivated. If you look on, we have a Discord channel and a Slack channel. Every day they're doing a countdown. Hey, 29 days to vote. Or they're saying, what's your plan? Pamela talked about the John Lewis, the chairs and waters. We have young people every day talking about how they're going to activate and go out to the polls, give out water, whether it's conversation with older folks or bringing their friends along. They seemed really focused on getting out and voting, and they're not politically correct, which I love about it. They're not hiding who they're voting for. They're not saying, well, I'm on the fence about it. They're letting you know, we don't like this guy that's in the office. We don't like this guy over here. We don't like this guy. So we're voting for this person. And that's the admirable to me, where they haven't been so tainted in this game where they have to keep it to themselves. They're very matter of fact. So I'm excited. I think the voter turnout is going to be. I think we're going to break records, and that's even with the Obama days. To be honest,
hey Charles, I just want to comment. I think we're already headed that way. Yesterday was the first day of early voting. Charles, we had lines, so we needed John Lewis's chairs and water right then and there yesterday. So if that's an indication, you are absolutely correct. We are going to have a huge voter turnout.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Please.
Just a bit. Charles, I think you laid it out perfectly. And I'd like to add that, this generation of young people are cutting across lines that my generation didn't dare to cross. And then, older generations, they're cutting across racial lines. They're cutting across gender lines. They're cutting across sexual orientation. These are not barriers for most of the young people today and hangups for young people. So they're able to get over that hurdle. And I think on top of that, they have a clear understanding that what's for wish dreams, right? Their human aspirations, their life chances, vision destinies, they're clear that this election can either propel their wish dreams or it can suppress it, and I'll even say obliterate them for another generation. I think that's what's going to motivate young people to get out to the polls like never before.
Mm-hmm. Charles, are you also seeing, Charles Bicknell, an uptick on people in your coming through the college that want to run for office, but they, are you seeing a difference in how they want to run, different types of office holders? What's your sense of that? What's the future look like from what you're seeing?
I'm seeing young people more engaged in like student government, interested in student government, student leadership positions.
Right.
And does an excellent job cultivating generation of leadership. But at the university, graduate level, we're seeing more younger people take the chance, but they're getting cultivated through units like African American Student Services. So the work that they're doing in that program, I think it's going to start generating younger leaders that we'll see coming out of the University of New Mexico.
Right. Those are those stepping stones, those little leadership
Exactly.
positions they build up over time. Exactly
Right.
right. Yeah. Isaac, sorry about that.
No worries. I think at a state level and even at a national level, and this question is for the entire panel, what are some common sense solutions that we can adopt to ensure that we do have a huge turnout at the polls, or however Black and brown folks choose to vote? What are some common sense solutions that we can enact, like I said, at a national level or even at a state level to eliminate that voter suppression? What can we do?
One of the most obvious places that we can start in making sure that people are voting and that they're getting out to vote is starting by looking at our churches. And the reason I say that is that every single person within our state is a member of some sort of religion, even if it's called no religion at all. But you contact and you call the people who are members of that organization, every single one of them, and making sure that there's a personal connection and asking them to vote. What we have found out is that when there is a personal connection with people, they will act. So that if you start making that personal action and connection, it will happen.
It's interesting. I'm going to change the subject here just a little bit. We're going to get to police brutality and reform. Just want to throw it out there for the group, whoever wants to take this on. Just a simple question. Is police reform as we know it, is it actually doable in a way that we would find palatable? Can we get that far?
I believe that it is, but it's going to be a long struggle. Police are very defensive, and that's why I suggested earlier we need a two-prong approach. We need the pressure on, but that makes some of the police officers, especially the unions, which are very strong, defensive. And there are a lot of people on the right, including the far right, who are supporting them, and they see those folks as allies. But a lot of Black Lives Matter folks and other folks are not talking to police. And I think we need the other part so that we can, hey, you guys are feeling the pressure. We feel for you. Let's find some common ground. I can't work alone, but I think that's an important element that needs to be included. And the pressure does have to be kept on it. And for once, it looks like it's staying that way. And more and more things are happening that are bad, which are helping bring about the change. That's it's terrible, the things that are happening, but the fortunate side is that we can turn that negativity around without forgetting how bad that is for people, and that helps keep the movement going, and it's very important.
And go ahead, Adrian.
Oh, unless somebody else wants to speak, I don't want to. Okay. I just have to say I respectfully disagree. And I think that if we look at the history of police and where police came from, we have not always had police. And the idea that we accept this as an inevitable thing in our communities, for me, is deeply problematic when the tragic things that Stephen's referring to have been happening for forever. None of this is new, right? We know that I grew up in Mississippi. I mean, we know that murdering Black people is not a new thing in this country. And the fact that nothing that anyone's ever tried to do has helped to make it different means we really just need to rethink our criminal legal system, our systems of public safety, the system of mass incarceration, that's got to go. At TGRC, we're essentially abolitionists, not to take the position that anyone should lose their job or that anybody's necessarily like a bad person, but these systems are not serving our communities. They're not keeping us safer. They're endangering us. So to me, the idea of reform and that kind of incremental change, we may have to accept it as a step to abolition, but I think we don't want to take our eyes off of a vision in the future of the world we want to live in, which for me cannot include policing the way that it's done today.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I'm for transformation. I don't want to just get rid of police departments, especially now. There's too much violence out there. But and we may have to do some things incrementally, but I'm not an incrementalist either. I think we need to change the whole system. And obviously, it's going to be a long process. We need to be after it. And you're right. I mean, the whole thing goes back to a lot of it is rooted in the racism that we've had all along. But fortunately, there's a movement to get beyond it. And the younger generation is very hopeful for us and for themselves about that. So I think we can do it. But I do think, even in the best society, we need something that does what police are supposed to be doing. And that's where I want to go. I mean, of course, I'm an applied philosopher. I'm more, what should it be? But, and then some of you are much better activists in figuring out, well, we can do it this way and that way. But there are definite things, and some of them are going on now. There are programs. Georgetown University has one getting officers to intervene when another officer is doing something wrong. There are a whole bunch of things and ways of totally changing the perspective, and that has to be done. It's a matter of mindset. And that's also why some of the dialoguing is important, though it takes a while to get there. Because if people, if it's just we're telling them you got to do that, they back off. And unfortunately, they've got some power to do that. But if we can say, hey, we have some common ground here, let's use that. And we may have to be more incremental than you and I would like at times, but I think it's possible to do it. But it's certainly, and it's not only policing. The whole society needs a lot of change. I mean, the way our economy works, a whole bunch of things. But right now, I think we're at one of those rare change moments. And, we may blow it, or it may not be there as much as we think. Let's hope so. And it's not all going to happen overnight, but I think there's a real possibility at this time, partly because who we happen to have in office at the moment has helped expose all these things. And the virus on top of that, the emperor has lost her clothes, all over the place. And an awful lot of people. You look at public opinion, most people agree we need to change. They don't always realize what needs to be done or how much to push it. But there's space out there. If enough people are working for it, I think it can actually happen.
There has been a breakdown of trust, as the both of you have eloquently spoken to. And when we talk about the deconstruction and, to use your words, Adrienne, to, being abolitionists. When we think about, police departments and we think about its functions, what does that deconstruction look like? There is absolutely no trust. And that's something that we definitely need to grapple with. And so if we are to deconstruct the functions of the police department, what then can that look like? So that it does become not just more palatable to community members, but also begins to rebuild that trust that has been lost.
Can I jump in real quick? I agree with a lot of what's being said, but I also look at it as if we're going to address an issue with policing or whatnot, and Adrienne, you're correct. This goes far back, right? It's been happening for so long, right? And Stephen is correct in regards to there's terrible things that's going on. But I'm from Southside Chicago kid, grew up in dirt poor circumstances, drugs, violence, whatnot. Half my family was drug dealers and gangbangers. The other half are cops. And what I was used to in our neighborhood was the policemen looked like us. They knew everyone in the neighborhood. There was this sense of community, It was a noble position. Like being a policeman when I was growing up, and this was like 79 up until 90s, whatever. It was noble, right? Everyone wanted that. It was you were looked at in a higher regard. So when I'm thinking of like what deconstruction would look like is this person, this human being, is tasked with so much responsibility that we need to figure out ways to not rush people through the academy. We need to figure out better ways to evaluate who we are putting out in front of our community. Because at the end of the day, your job is not to kill us. Your job is not to harass us. Your job is just to be a safety net for us. You are a steward of the community. So I think if we can put more emphasis on, and I don't want to say training, you can train all day. You need to figure out ways to evaluate people and figure out ways to put them through the gauntlet of programs and what's the culture, evaluate the culture, and run it like a university. Heck, you can go be a teacher after 4 years and you don't have a gun, but you can go to the academy for a couple of months and they deem you fit to go into this world, which is chaotic, right? It's a chaotic world. So you would think that the deconstruction would look like, let's put in a more robust education experience. I don't want to call it training. It's an educational experience. You need to learn about other communities, other cultures. You need to read, like Dr. Becknell said, pick up a book. They need to have you reading and learning about other cultures and whatnot. And I'll say this to end it. When people fall back on they just need to read a little bit more. Black people we've read about every culture. We're empathetic to Jewish people. We're empathetic to the Asian community. We're empathetic to the Native community. We're empathetic to our gay friends. We're empathetic to all communities because, you know why? We're open to reading and learning about everyone else, right? So that type of same philosophy needs to be probably injected into law enforcement, where you learn and you feel for people. So then they're not your enemy when you're going into their communities. They're your community. They're part of your community. They're a colleague. They're a friend. They're friends. That parent is. They have friends of friends of friends. Their daughters are friends, right? That's how policing should be looked at, and that's what I grew up in Southside Chicago. So everyone looks at the Southside Chicago. It's like, oh, it's terrible. Now, when I grew up, we knew every cop in our neighborhood. And then if you got in trouble, the first thing they would say is like, boy, I'll tell your mama. Like, that was number one. I'll tell your mama. They didn't take you to jail. So I think that's what we have to get back to in really vetting these police officers.
Yep. Hey, Charles, I really want to ask you a follow-up on that. And then Doris, if you can pick up on this as well. There's a thought out there that a minimum threshold for education might be a good idea for police officers as well, because it would get to exactly what you're talking about. That's the idea of a liberal education, is to learn about the rest of the world. Frankly, it's not a complicated thing. But on the other side of that, folks who support police say, well, you know what? The amount of candidates are going to drop like a stone. Charles, actually pick up on that. I mean, do you support that? And then, what's the benefits if we go that route?
No, I support it. Yeah. Who's ever complained about being well traveled and well versed? Right? That's the benefit of education. It's the benefit of when you go. All of you could probably speak to your college experience where you met people from all walks of life. You traveled. You learned about other cultures, right. Other people's philosophy. Right. So education is our greatest weapon that we have, and for some reason, it's the one thing that we don't want to put. It's the one thing that we don't force upon a group of people who have arguably the most influence in our society, the most power. The police unions are probably one of the most powerful unions in our society, and yet we are refusing to say, let's educate them more. I'll never wrap my head around refusing more education, because it's going to only lead to a richer experience in our community. It's going to lead to people gaining more trust in you. It's going to lead to you actually thinking about twice, should I just shoot this person because he's 6'5" and black? Right? There are certain things that education will allow you to do. So I'm all for more education.
Gotcha.
Yeah. In the early 1970s, there was federal money to send officers to universities. and a lot of them got educated. I had some of those guys.
Wow.
And I could see a change in police departments afterwards. So I think that's an important point, and public policy can help make that possible, and expand the pool of people who can be eligible. But I also want to say one other thing. There's one thing that tends to be more intellectual part, but there's the gut stuff that happens every day. And when you go back to, Charles, what you were talking about with the community, that's when the guys were in on the streets. You had your regular guys there. They knew the community. Most of the time now we've moved away from that. I'm not sure at the moment where it's at. We've done some community policing, but not enough. And you really have the people in the communities, and then you really do it right. So you set it up, you have regular meetings in the community, you're meeting with people. It's not just who you happen to know on the street. And if you train police officers to talk to each other, and you have the military does this all the time. Actually, some of this is making all institutions participatory so that everybody helps solve problems. And then people, if something's wrong, it's not looked at, oh, you're to blame. I mean, sometimes you do have to punish somebody or get rid of them. But most of the time it's, how can we solve this problem? How can we do it better? And if you get those attitudes on and you're doing it in the community, and community people are involved, and then, of course, more of the officers themselves either are from or represent or like the community, that I think will help bring about the kind of transformation all of us would like.
We've spoken, at length about, Doris, you were going to go ahead.
I agree with what Charles and Stephen said. The only thing I would add would be, I think we need to have a commensurate re-examination of what we're asking police folks to do. I don't disagree that more training needs to happen. I think it was in Florida where they showed side-by-side statistics with the amount of training a police officer receives is a quarter of that of what a salon worker receives in terms of being trained. And so when you think about that, just in terms of that comparison and the complexity of what most police folks are being asked to do, we need to re-examine and reallocate those funds to serving the community. So I think that's a huge piece there that, for me, I have similar, Charles, I don't have drug dealers in my family, but I have a lot of police folks in my family. And it was, I remember when my brother came home and said he was going to the academy. He was in Colorado, and you could have dropped a pin in our house because it was like he's gone to the dark side. And I think for us, what happened was through his experiences, we really started to see in close proximity what he was being trained to do and what he was being asked to do and the gaps in that. So I think that's another piece of this conversation we need to have when we talk about police forces.
So I just want to add one other small piece that I think we cannot forget. When police or law enforcement go into their cadet training, there really should be communities of color that come in and have a conversation with them so they can understand the different cultures and so that we won't always have this misunderstanding. Every single person going through the police academy should go through a implicit bias test so they can see exactly where their biases lay, and they can be ready to address those and deal with them. But one of the things I just saw come out today is that the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department is opening up an advisory council or committee, and they're asking the community to join, to apply to be on that. So what I'm saying is that it's really important for community people to be a part of those advisory councils so that your voice can be heard. I mean, for so long we saw the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office not use lapel cameras, and that's been something that has been missing and needed, even though the money was provided for it. And so what they would learn and understand more about that. You don't shoot somebody 5 times when they're running away and in the back. So all 3 of those items need to be a part of what's on the table. Join these advisory panels. And anybody listening today who's in Bernalillo County, submit that application and get on that advisory panel.
Good. On reducing what officers do, well, we've done a little bit of that, or we're starting to do a little bit of that here in Albuquerque, and I think that's good because officers can't be trained fully in everything. And so having social workers intervene and so forth. Sometimes, though, police will run into something that really a social worker should handle, but then they should be able to call them. And maybe there's some cases of somebody who might be violent. You need to have a police person along. But actually, that also might be good because it's ongoing education. If they're interacting regularly with the social worker, they may be able to get some of their perspective. And so I think all of that is important. And one of the problems now with police, they come out of the academy, and usually it depends on the department. Every place is different. But it's quite often then they're assigned to work with somebody as a partner who's a senior officer. Well, are those senior officers given any training in doing that? And and we need to be careful about how we do that. And again, as we set up teams, I mean, if we really work on community problem solving, this has been done in some areas, some cases. So we have something to build on so that if you got a problem in a neighborhood, then you bring in everybody who's involved. If it's near a school and that's part of it, let's say there's a drug problem. Well, hopefully we'll decriminalize them, but still it'll be a social problem. We've got to deal with it. You may need police because there's still people selling illegally. But you also need the social workers, and parents need to be involved. And the extent we have team process, that way I think will be better overall. It will take some off the officers, but it will also teach the officers more about what's going on and broaden their perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've spoken at length about extensive education and training that is required. We've spoken about the deconstruction of the police department's functions and requiring more community trust. So what can we do to keep what is working, what is good, and change what's bad regarding our police system? So it's definitely a balance. So what can we do to keep what's good and then change what definitely needs to be changed?
Well, one of the good things that we can keep going is if throughout the community schools, for example, in Albuquerque, I see the police going there serving a dinner as a part of their community dinners at night, and engaging with families, having conversations with them, showing that, look, I put on my pants one leg at a time, just like you. So we can absolutely work through our differences. I hope to see that continue because I think that is a good resource for communities of color. We don't always encourage our children to grow up to be police officers, but if you see that camaraderie, that interchange between police and younger students, we might see more and more people of color in the law enforcement and in police academies, so that would also help dissipate some of the distrust and lack of knowledge about cultures that we see occurring so very often.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have a follow-up to that? I thought I saw somebody. Go ahead, Charles Bucknell.
Yeah, I think about this, and the difficulty that I see is that the police are now a paramilitary unit.
Right.
And so the challenge of undoing all of that seems daunting. I mean, when the police are investing in tanks and Kevlar vests and paramilitary, artillery, it seems like community policing should look completely different. And I'm not sure how it should look, but that's what we're up against. Mm-hmm. We're not up against, policing in the 80s and the 90s. I think we're up against the military.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that has to change. Now, some of that is a matter of legislation, public policy, some national, stop selling those military equipment. Yeah, a small amount should be in reserve because you may have some terrorist or some situation where, you need it, but that's it. We overuse our SWAT teams. originally, they're a good idea, but they're used for all kinds of things they shouldn't be. And that's first a matter of policy. There are two ways to go. One is to try and transform departments that we have now, some because of public policy changes, but even at the national level on some of what we're talking about. But you can either try to transform existing departments, and each case will be different, and there are various windows, or do what Camden, New Jersey partially did, because it's not a complete model. But their police department was operating terribly, and mostly white officers from outside in community of color. No trust in the community, highest murder rate in the country. So they shut down the department, but they needed a department. So they started a county department instead. And they rebuilt a new police department. They had to have police. They rehired a lot of the same people, but they made them go through a whole new hiring process, and they did it on a different basis. Not perfect. It wasn't what we'd like in the way of community policing, but it did create more trust. It did operate more along the lines. And that's one thing that can be done if it has to be. I don't know that we're in that situation in Albuquerque. Some of it also is, when contracts come up for police unions, there may be a time to renegotiate them. And there's some things in those contracts that make it hard to change. And if you can get at those moments, you have some leverage. You might not have at other times. And I haven't heard, but I think, unfortunately, that the contract has probably been renewed in Albuquerque if it was coming up. If it hasn't, that would be still a leverage point.
And I'll say, and I know we got to go or time is moving, vote. Like you vote for the sheriff, right? You vote for your sheriff, right? Yeah. You vote for the mayor. When you go to the mayor or this woman or man is at your door, knocking on your door, you say, tell me about your police plan. Like, tell me, what do you believe in? What's your philosophy? What's your ideology? We vote for the people who control, who are in these higher seats. Right. And I think it's hard for us to realize that. I think Bernalillo County's numbers for voting for the sheriff are low. What did we ask of Mayor Keller when it came to APD? What do we ask from the people who we were voting for? That is key. Whether if we start with the sheriff, it's a start. And Dr. Becknell, you're right, it's daunting. But what I do know about a politician is they're always trying to win and get reelected. So if you have a nice set of demands and you have a strong voter contingency with you, please believe some of those reforms that we're talking about right now will be passed on. A lot of the ideas we're talking about right now will be passed down. And then if not, then we'll vote for the next one. And then when they see that that we're powerful as voters and we are choosing who's the sheriff, choosing who's the mayor, because we know that mayor is going to pick the next chief of police that's going to do right by the community, you'll see a shift. But it is daunting. But I think voting, like vote, we can vote some of these people out. We can vote them out.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm glad you got that in. We have, of course, a mayor currently looking for a chief of police right now for the city of Albuquerque. And Pamela, let me throw this one at you. I've asked this of a number of people over the past few weeks. Is it all these reforms? Is it about that person at the top? Isn't it? When you really think about it, the chief can be so influential in all these issues we're talking about. Would this mayor or any mayor be brave enough to hire a Black woman to be chief of police here in Albuquerque? And what kind of change would that make? Is it not appropriate to imagine that kind of a scenario? And if it is, how do we let those kind of feelings known to a current sitting mayor that, look, maybe that's the way to go? Maybe saying you're doing a nationwide search is all well and good, but let's really talk about who you're willing to hire to lead our police department.
So I absolutely support that idea. And I just start by looking at the police department as it is right now. The last time I looked, there was not a single African-American woman as a part of that police force. And so that's something that we need to change. And to put an African-American woman as the chief of police would truly show an innovative mayor who who is ready for change and is ready to embrace it within our community. So I would encourage that 100%. And as a matter of fact, I think that that's something that our community should sit down and have a conversation with Mayor Keller about. He campaigned on being a mayor of change, a mayor who was going to bring about a difference. That would be a difference, Mayor Keller, and I'd like to see you do it.
Mhm.
I want to echo that with one caveat. You've got to make sure you have someone that is effective and who the people in the police department will respect, because if you don't, they may not be effective. Mm-hmm. But I think that having a black woman would be great, and I'm sure there are plenty of good, really competent black women out there. And if we get somebody really good like that, that would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's.
Go ahead, Doris. Go ahead.
Sorry. We have to rock, paper, scissors it out. I would add. I think it's Zora Neale Hurston has said, "My skin folk are not necessarily my kin folk." And so we need to be careful that it's just not about a black woman or a person of color coming into these positions, but that they too have a sense of cultural humility to lead in ways that serve these communities that are on the margins and have been disenfranchised for so long. So we need to be careful with that.
So I was going to say the same thing. I would love to see a black woman in there. And I was going to say, Stephen, if it's at the top and that person affects your checks and your pension, please believe you're going to see change. It might not be quickly, but if you're affecting that bottom line, you're going to see some. I'm telling you, people care about their money. So if I need to do right and not be out here just killing innocent black and brown folks because you're going to take my check away, I'm pretty sure that'll get through to them. So that's why I'm confident that if it starts at the top, you can work your way down. Because think about this: if you get a chief who cares about people, who you think they're going to appoint for, like the deputy chief? Who you think they're going to appoint for right? You're going to put people around you who share your values. So you truly get this. I don't even like to say trickle down. I like trickle up. I think change comes from the people. It's a trickle up. The people change things. So if we can get someone who is a chief or a sheriff that they might not even have law enforcement background, when they come from the people, that's trickle up. That person's going to go in and understand what the community is looking for, why the community doesn't trust law enforcement, what things can we do to implement change in law enforcement, and you get this trickle up, and you'll see a chief with someone who's awesome with their lieutenant deputy or their lieutenant chief over there, and you're going to get this culture that is reflective of our community. So I believe it can be done. As Dr. Becknell said, it's daunting, but as I said, I'm a habitual line stepper. We'll get it done.
I would exercise caution, thinking that that money is going to dictate a person's outcome, because we're living in a time now where money is not the issue. What this current administration in our nation is demanding is sacrifice, like the sacrifice of people's lives, right? So money is not a motivator anymore. And it's moved from being simply about racism and white supremacy and, people on the margins to really expecting people to sacrifice their lives. So it's beyond that. I think it's like, idolatry right now is really what people are being caught up in. And money, white supremacy, and racism are sort of underneath all of that. This is really a strange time we're living in. And I would say, Charles, I agree with you, 5 years ago. But what we're seeing today is really not money driven, nor is it race driven. I think it goes beyond that, because this, I can't imagine why people are sacrificing their life for nothing in return.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like we've come right up against that time. 6:40. We have a vice presidential debate tonight to
Yes.
all get ready for. This could be very interesting about 20 minutes from now. But I very much want to thank for the group, of course, our brilliant co-host, Isaac. You were just from the beginning of this, I have to say, thank you very much for your vision, the way you drove us to really kind of get some very real clarity on this and the questioning and just all the work you put into it. I want to thank you very much. It's just really, Isaac, to work with, it's been terrific. I also want to thank Charles Ashley III, certainly, Adrian Lawyer, Pamela Herndon, Dr. Charles Becknell Jr. from UNM, Stephen Sachs, your stuff is always wonderful, and Dr. Doris Watson out there at UNLV. And also, we want to especially thank our folks who put this on. There's one of them, there's Teresa, and Pam should be coming in a quick second. We always want to say hello to them and thank you as well. So Teresa, if you want to sum up for us on a great night, I hope you feel good about it, because I think you put something really special together here that'll be a good archive for our city for a long time. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate all of you guys participating. I think it's been a very informative night. I just want to, and I'm surprised I don't see my co-host Pam yet, but I know that I think we have Michelle Melendez, I believe, who also had joined us a little bit late, who also wanted to bring greetings from the city. But since they are not on right now, I will give my closing remarks. So I do want to first and foremost thank Pam and the members of the New Mexico Out Business Alliance for co-hosting tonight's event with us, Congresswoman Holland, the awesome, I mean literally awesome group of panelists, and our outstanding moderators for their participations, and also to our audience. Thank you for joining us. This was a very educational discussion with thought-provoking information, and so I think we had talked about at length of what we believe our call to action should be after this session. And an obvious one is to make sure within the next few days, you and members of your family or inner circle vote. I mean, that's really key. That's very important. And Pamela said it several times, and other members of the panel also echoed it as well. So I just want to thank you all again for joining us tonight. And I hope that you all tune in to the vice presidential debates, which is about to happen here really soon. And so don't know what happened. Oh, there she is.
Yes, sorry about that.
Well, I have just finished all of my closing remarks, Pam, so now it's all up to you.
Oh, well, thank you. We were waiting to see if Michelle Melendez with the City of Albuquerque Director of Equity Inclusion could join us, but I am not seeing her on here. So she felt bad that she could not get on earlier. It was just a inconvenient blockage. So I wanted to just, I guess, thank everybody for joining. And we really appreciate everybody's time that you've taken to respond and pay attention to what's going on. And we hope this doesn't end here. We want to keep this conversation going. If you have suggestions on how we can do that, we'd love to hear from everybody on how we can do that. But we definitely don't want to stop here with this conversation. So thank you, Jean and Isaac and Teresa. We appreciate everybody's participation.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you.
All right. Well, you guys have a good night and enjoy the vice presidential debates.
Yes.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Teresa.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Wonderful.